humans? My name is David, and I help people develop self-awareness and self-compassion, usually using personality and meditation. And welcome to another Blue Chair Talk. Here, we will eventually one day talk about personality, but right now we are in the middle of a series on the two hemispheres of the brain, and that is such a foundational and helpful part of developing self-awareness and indeed self-compassion. That said, after my little chat today about the hemispheres, I'm going to follow it up with about a 10-minute meditation in the second half of today's video. These are sort of weekly, unscripted, mostly, videos. And this one is picking right up where we were in the series. This one is about flow as opposed to procedures. And this is again about contrasting how our two hemispheres bring the world to life within us, inside our head, but in very different ways, with very different values, with very different raison d'être, as the French love to say, or at least that's French. Okay, so here's the dealio. The right side hemisphere, that is your hemisphere of the big picture. And then your left hemisphere, for most people, right? And that's connected to your right hand, your dominant hand. That is the hemisphere of clear boundaries and control, right? Its purpose is to enable us to control our environment, right? And one of the main ways it does that is by drawing clear lines around things, sometimes even when they're not there, so that it can understand them, control them, all this kind of stuff. So with that as our general context, our general backdrop, I want to contrast flow as opposed to procedures. And one good example that I thought of for procedures was an IKEA or Lego how to build this kind of instruction manual where literally there are numbers for the steps, right? So on page 1, you have this big 1, and it's like lay everything out flat and make sure we didn't like miss any bolts, or you're not missing any pieces. Anyway, and then it keeps on going, and there's a process, there's a clear, repeatable procedure to enable you to get to the end point of having furniture or cool Legos. So that's great. This is a very good thing, and that's kind of how the left hemisphere conceives of things. It wants clear steps, it wants sequentialness, and it wants a clear boundary between step 1 and step 2. First do this, then when you are done, then start this, right? And that is so powerful. It's very good in so many spheres of life, right? And also, it's not really how real life works. You may have noticed this. If you have graduated from college and gone out into the real world with some idea of like, hey, this is my plan. I'm going to be awesome at this, and then they're going to pay me lots of money, or whatever your plan was. You may have noticed it wasn't as clean as that, right? It wasn't step 1, step 2, step 3, up and to the right. No, life, I don't know, life is messy, right? Our main contrast here is that life flows. The real point is that there aren't clear boundaries most of the time in life. I was trying to think of sort of somewhat extreme examples of like, where does it really feel like there definitely are clear boundaries? And the first thing that came to mind was between people, humans, right? Where it's like, well, this is me, and then I can very easily tell, hey, that's that other person over there, you know? And yeah, like, understandable. I'm not trying to argue against that. But then there are ways in which that boundary isn't always that clean cut, right? And you even hear this in sort of like a whole book on boundaries, right? And so in some contexts, a lot of contexts, it would be good to have really good personal boundaries. But actually, in so many other contexts, it's far more important to understand and honor the interrelatedness of especially those close to us, those in our family. What I do really affects them, right? So yeah, we're different people, right? we're separate people, but there is an interconnectedness, a sort of flow in a way between humans that is really important for us to not lose sight of. And boy, oh boy, the left hemisphere sure loves boundaries and drawing clear lines, and whether they are really that clean or not, you know? So another way that I thought would be helpful to see this in action and start to try to see this in your own life is actually when it comes to skills. So in high level skill development contexts, right? So I'm thinking like really good sports coaching or high level music education. Usually the approach, at least in part, is to break it down into concrete steps, right? So if maybe you are learning how to swing a golf club, you may learn, I don't know, interlock these, or I can't remember, right? Something like that. Hold it a certain way, and then as you swing back, be really careful. Don't move your hips, or do move your hips. I can't remember what the real instructions are. My dad is going to be so disappointed. No, not really, but you have to have a certain, right? There are like these procedural ways of doing it that you learn and that you practice. Or let's take in the musical context, scales, right? Or maybe you're working through a couple bars of a new piece that you're learning, right? And you're just repeatedly working on this one same move on the piano, right? And you do it like however many times. And you have to slow it down to be able to really get that precise thing, right? And what you've done is you've kind of compartmentalized. To some extent, you've drawn an artificial boundary around something so that you can zoom in on it and really work on the details and get it so clear. But then to really perform, to really live it out, and especially if you want to breathe life into it, if we're talking art or even in sports, sometimes you hear people say like, man, that athlete is an artist, right? What's happening is they're putting that procedural thing that they focused in on, right? They zoomed in on and compartmentalized temporarily. They're putting that piece back all together into a clean flow. And the way you can notice this is, at least for me, this shows up so much in sports. Billiards or like shooting pool, definitely golf, the very little that I have practiced it, right? If I overthink it, if I try to analyze, if that part of my brain, mostly left hemisphere, switches on in a procedural way where I'm thinking, okay, first this, then that, then this thing, I am so awkward. I do it almost always very poorly because that's not what that part of my brain is for. The procedural, clean, distinct step after distinct step, sort of mechanistic, like this thing, then that thing, then this thing. That's not how life really mostly works. Life is flowing. So I would say, instead of like lift up the club here, up there, what I need to do in order to reintegrate it all and to actually do a good job is one clean swing, right? Where it does become a seamless whole again, right? This is maybe sort of analogous to, I don't know, like waves. That's definitely what it makes me think of, where, yeah, you can like count waves if you're like looking out on the ocean. You can sort of count like that's this wave and then the next one and the next one. And yeah, they're different. They're distinct, right? You could number them the same way you have numbers in the steps in the Lego procedures, right? But the boundary between exactly where this wave becomes that next wave is just not as clear as you'd like to think, even though you're great at numbers, right? There is an interconnectedness and a flow to all of life. So this week, the invitation is to start noticing that, because we have so many categories. Even the flow of time we have, for some very good reasons, we've divided up into minutes and hours, etc. But really, many of the boundaries that we see, experience, and believe are there, and in some contexts are important, they're just not as clear as we've come to believe. A lot more flow going on. So that is the invitation this week. A really great place to notice the flow is in meditation. So wherever you are, go ahead and settle in, close your eyes, and start by taking a few deep breaths. How long has it been since we started meditating? One minute? Maybe two? You may have a relatively accurate estimate, but we don't have a built-in clock that works the way an actual clock does, right? Our experience of time is pretty much, it works in impressions. Maybe echoing back to last week's episode, most of the time is more of an implicit thing that we feel is made explicit only when we bring in numbers and clocks to measure it. Without clocks or watches, how do we actually track or experience the flow of time? And I don't mean sun coming up and down. That's a great answer. But thinking more to invite you into trying to notice how feelings affect your impression of the flow of time. For example, when you're bored, things feel like they must be moving so much more slowly. But another aspect of our human experience that affects how we experience time is sort of an intersection of a particular kind of attention and consciousness. It's similar in a way to self-consciousness. And experientially, it's also sort of similar to the feeling of waking up. It takes a sort of lightly jarring jolt for us to usually mark the passing of time. This can be hard to notice, and I'm sure if you've never noticed it, then my description probably isn't particularly vivid or necessarily ringing any bells, but the invitation to you is to watch your own mind, observe your own experience, and become curious about, your relationship to the flow of time, the ways in which it feels like flow, and the ways in which it feels more compartmentalized or procedural. Not because one is always better, not because one is good and one is bad, just as a means of gradually developing more self-awareness and self-compassion. There are both of these at play within us. And we can enjoy both the flowiness and the proceduralness or the punctuatedness of our experience. As we wrap up for today, I'll remind you that the invitation this week is to try and notice where life is actually more flowing than you may have realized. When you start looking for flow and change and uniqueness across time, changingness across time, start to find it everywhere. I think maybe of a river, when we say a river, that just sounds like it's a thing. But rivers are constantly changing. because of the flowing water and its interaction with the rest of the environment around it. And life is so much more like that than it is like river, the dictionary definition and icon of riverness in our brain. So, quick summing up, the left hemisphere is in charge of your right hand, and it wants to control things, so it wants clear boundaries around things. And that's why a lot of life feels procedural. This step, then that step, nice and compartmentalized, so that there is a easy repeatableness and control available. And that's great for a lot of things, but most of life is flow, the ever-changing uniqueness of all of this. Oh my goodness. Okay, all right. This stuff is so exciting to me, and I hope that you found this interesting, and I really hope that you can start to notice these two aspects of your experience and come to love both of them and appreciate both of them and attune to both of them. So if this is helpful, feel free to share it with some friends of yours. Maybe they are also developing self-awareness and self-compassion. I want to help as many people as possible, so maybe you can help me help more people. And I hope you'll tune in next week. Another Blue Chair Talk coming right up in a week. So until then, know your mind, love your life.